Howdy folks. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about the determinants of supply and demand. Now what I mean by determinants of supply and demand is, do you remember when we talked about that there are two things on a market graph? There are two variables that are on a market graph, right? We have quantity and we have price, okay? And that if we have a demand curve that's downward sloping, and remember that the demand curve is downward sloping because of the law of demand, which says that if the price goes down, people will buy more, but if the price goes up, people will buy less. Okay, that's the law of demand. And we said that if the price changes, so let's say we've got a price of 7 and the quantity demanded then is, I don't know, 100 at a price of $7. But then if the price changes, if the price goes down by $2 to $5, then that's going to cause an increase in quantity demanded, right? So now let's say quantity demanded will now be 150. That is a change in quantity demanded, not a change in demand. A change in demand would be a situation where a variable that is not represented on the graph is changing. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about all the variables, or some of the variables, that affect this curve that are not on the graph. So we are not going to talk about quantity, and we are not going to talk about price. I mean, they're going to be affected. Price and quantity will be affected, but I want to focus on what is causing this curve to be where it is. What is causing this curve to have a particular slope, and what's causing the curve to have a particular y-intercept. Okay, because it is as of now. Normally, it won't be in real life. It's not going to be a straight line, but we're using it as a straight line. So the first thing I want you to understand, and you should start writing stuff down now, is that I need you to understand the difference between an increase in demand and a decrease in demand. So very simply, the idea goes that an increase in demand means that people want more of the stuff. Remember that demand is the willingness and ability to buy. The willingness and ability to buy a product. And so an increase in demand would be either an increase in the willingness or an increase in the ability to buy a product. Usually it's both. It's an increase in the ability and the willingness. But with many of the things we're going to talk about, these determinants of supply and demand, they'll usually focus on the willingness more or the ability more, and I'll point that out to you. So an increase in demand means that the willingness and ability have gone up. A decrease in demand means the willingness and ability to buy have gone down. And this should make a lot of sense to you. But here's what I want to show you. On a market graph, how is an increase in demand represented? Well, remember in the last lesson we talked about shifts in the curve, that this curve can shift to the right and it can shift to the left. Well, an increase in demand would be a right shift of the demand curve. Okay, so the demand curve is going to shift to the right when there's an increase in demand, and then a decrease in demand would be a left shift of the demand curve. Okay, so when demand increases, what happens is this curve shifts to the right, and now it's over here instead, and we're going to call that D prime. On the other hand, if demand decreases, that curve is going to shift to the left, and it's going to be over to the left of this curve, and we're going to call that d double prime in this case. Now, double prime doesn't belong to decrease, and prime doesn't belong to increase. Usually the first one you do, you make it prime. The second one you do, you make it double prime, and if you do a third change, then you'd call it triple prime or something, okay? So that is an increase in demand and a decrease in demand, and they cause a rightward shift and a leftward shift of the demand curve respectively, okay? All right, folks, so we're going to go ahead and talk about all the different, probably the most popular things that determine demand. And I've written them all here, and we're going to go through them one by one. Some of them are a little more complicated than others, so we'll spend more time on some and less time on some of the others, okay? But the 5 determinants are income. Now, this is income of buyers, okay? This is the income of buyers. The popularity of the product itself, the prices of related products, not the price of this product. If the price of this product changes, that's just going to affect quantity demanded. It's not going to affect the whole curve itself. But the price of another product could affect the demand for this product, and we'll get into that in a couple more minutes. Then there's the number of buyers that are in the market. That's sort of an easy one. And then there's expectations of the future price. And so what we're going to do is we're going to explain each one of these and show whether if any of these changes, for example, if income increases or decreases, how is that going to affect demand? And then ultimately, how is that going to affect the demand curve in the market? So over here, we're going to put a market graph, and we're going to put a demand curve, which is downward sloping. There we go. Downward sloping demand curve. So let's start off, we'll talk about income. Now, income means whether buyers in general, not one particular buyer. If one person starts making more money, but everybody else makes less money, well, that means that income has gone down. Okay, it may have gone up for one person, but it's gone down for all the other thousands or millions of people. Okay, so when we say income, we're talking about, in general, the income for all of the buyers in the market. So, income, generally speaking, can either go up or it can go down. Or let's say income can increase or income can decrease. And so, so let's make this. Let's go ahead and draw it out this way. So the two possibilities are income can increase and income can decrease. All right, so that's the only thing that can happen to income. Now here's the interesting thing. People behave differently when they have more money, depending on what they're buying. And so, for example, if you have more money, you may be willing to go out to eat at Chili's or Red Lobster because you now have more money. But if you go out to eat at Red Lobster or Chili's, you may be less likely to eat someplace like McDonald's. You may, when you don't have very much money, go get a meal every Friday during lunchtime at McDonald's. But then, somehow or another, your income increases, and you now have a bunch more money coming in every single month or every single week or every couple weeks. And you may decide, you know what? I'm going to stop going to McDonald's on Friday afternoon for lunch. I'm going to start going to Chili's on Friday afternoon for lunch. Why? Because you have more money. And so the comparison, the words that we use in economics are, we use the word normal, and we use the word inferior. Now, I'm not saying that McDonald's is inferior. I'm just making a comparison that many people would say that McDonald's is inferior to Chili's when getting ready to go have lunch, and that depends on who you are. Now, some people may hate Chili's, and so they would put Chili's as inferior. But the basic quality of an inferior good is that it's usually something that you settle for and it costs less money. Something that is normal is something that costs more than an inferior good and meets the same need as an inferior good. So normal and inferior goods, they meet the same need, So they meet the same need, like lunch, okay? Except that normal costs more and inferior costs less. If you've ever been to Aldi, the grocery store, they sell off-brands of like, you know, Cheerios and Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and it's their own brand, okay, but it's less expensive, but it's basically the same product. In economics, we're not saying that there's something wrong with the product, but in economics, that would meet the definition of the word inferior versus the normal. Okay, so if you go buy Cheerios at Publix, that's the normal good. If you go buy the, you know, toasted oats at Walmart or Aldi or whatever, you're buying an inferior good. Okay. By the way, the Publix brand of a product would often be called the inferior good, and then the name brand would be called the normal good. So here's the thing. What happens to demand when income increases or decreases depends on whether the product is a normal good or an inferior good. And here's the idea. If the product is a normal good, then when people have more money, when income increases, increase in income will typically lead to an increase in demand. Lead to an increase in demand for a normal good. Whereas, now here's the interesting thing, if income goes up, it'll usually lead to a decrease in demand for inferior goods, so decrease in demand. And the reason for that is because people now have more money. They don't have to buy the off-brand. They don't have to buy the inferior product. Now, what happens when income decreases? Now people have less money, and that happens for lots of reasons, because the economy is struggling, people are getting fewer hours, or people are getting laid off. You know, you used to have 2 jobs, now you have 1 job. So when income decreases, so if you have a decrease in income, then it's going to be the exact opposite effect. People are now, they have less money, so they can't buy as many of the normal goods. So you're going to have a decrease in normal, I meant to say demand. You're going to have a decrease in demand for normal goods. But when you have less income, so when income goes down, you may go back to buying the off-brand, the inferior good, okay? And so that's going to be a decrease in, an increase in demand. And you'll see an increase in demand for inferior goods. So basically, so now let's sum it up. For a normal good, when income increases for buyers, they're going to buy more. They're going to increase demand in the normal goods. And that's going to cause a rightward shift. So that's going to cause a right shift in the D curve. Okay? So that's a rightward shift here. So the demand curve is going to shift to the right. Also, we're going to have a rightward shift in the demand curve if there's a decrease in income, but for inferior goods. So if people make less money, the demand curve is going to shift to the right, right shift of the demand curve. On the other hand, if people's income goes down, they're going to buy fewer of the normal goods, demand will decrease, and that's going to be a left shift of the demand curve. Okay, so then the demand curve will shift to the left. We'll have a D double prime here, and the demand curve will now lie to the left of its original position. That exact same thing will happen for the demand of inferior goods if income goes up. So if this is the market, for inferior cereal, and the economy gets really good, lots of people have more money, then they'll stop buying the inferior cereal and they'll buy more of the normal. So income increases, Demand goes down for the inferior, and demand goes up for the normal. Okay? And so I think that's all I have to say about income. And now we'll move on to the next determinant. Now let's talk about the popularity of the product. And when I say popularity, I mean something like whether it's in style or not in style. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, there were certain brands of shoes that were very popular and other brands that were less popular. There were certain brands of clothing that were very popular and others that were less popular. In fact, nowadays people like to joke about and kind of make fun of the clothing that people used to wear when I was a teenager. I don't own any of those clothing anymore, but I find it interesting that people make fun of the clothing that used to be popular, because if that's you making fun of clothing that used to be popular, then in 30 years you can expect everybody to be making fun of the clothing you're wearing right now. So the idea is that products become more popular and less popular. And there was a time when Apple products were not nearly as popular as they are right now, and you might be watching this video at a time when Apple products aren't as popular as they are while I'm recording it right now. I happen to be using an Apple product to record this video. But, you know, products, brands, types of clothing, hairstyles, their popularity changes. And so the idea of popularity is almost like the idea of whether something is in style or not in style. And the truth comes down to this. This is the focus of this idea here, is that people tend to be more willing to buy products that are more popular. Okay? So, I didn't mention this when I talked about income, but income affects a person's ability to buy, not their willingness to buy. When you have more money, you're now able to buy better things or buy more things. So income affects ability to buy, where popularity affects willingness to buy, mostly willingness. Now, it can also affect ability to buy, because when something is more popular, stores are more likely to have it in stock. If something's not very popular, it's not going to be in stock. But I remember when Silly Bands were really popular, they were selling those things at Best Buy. I mean, why are they selling Silly Bands at an electronics store? Well, because they were very popular. But then when they weren't popular anymore, they stopped selling them at Best Buy. They even stopped selling them at Walmart. So in this case, popularity affects a person, the buyer's willingness to buy. They become more willing when the product is more popular, and they become less willing when the product is less popular. And so here's what we're going to say, is that when there is an increase, this is supposed to be an upward arrow, an increase in popularity will lead to an increase in demand. And I'm just going to use the letter D here to represent demand. An increase, that's arrow up, that's an increase in demand. So an increase in popularity is going to lead to an increase in demand. Then similarly, a decrease in the popularity of a product is going to lead to a decrease in demand. So what we have here is a positive relationship between popularity of a product and the demand for the product. So when something becomes more popular, like a particular brand of clothing, now everybody wants it because it's really popular. They want to be seen wearing it. Okay? And so what that's going to do is that is going to shift the demand curve to the right. Oops, I don't need an arrowhead there. So going to shift the demand curve to the right because the product is more popular. Okay? Now, and this is one of the reasons why companies want famous people to wear their stuff or to use their stuff. You know, if there's pictures in the magazine of a famous person, a famous actor or an athlete wearing the clothing of a company, people, regular buyers like me who don't have their pictures in magazines, we look at the magazine and we say, oh man, there's my favorite football player, and oh, look at that, he's wearing Adidas shoes. I want to go get Adidas shoes. And so then that increases the popularity. So when celebrities use products, that oftentimes increases the popularity of the product, and that's going to shift the demand curve to the right. Similarly, if something loses popularity, there was actually a situation, there was a television show called Jersey Shore, and one of the characters in the show apparently really enjoyed wearing a certain brand of clothing. And I had heard, I saw an article where that company contacted that actor, and because people didn't really like that, well, he wasn't really an actor, as a reality show, but I mean, I guess he's an actor. They contacted that person and they said, can you please stop? We will pay you to stop wearing our clothing. They wanted to pay him to not wear their clothing because they felt as though his behavior in the show was negatively affecting their sales. It was making their clothing less popular and causing the demand curve to shift to the left. And no company wants their demand curve to shift to the left because that's a decrease in demand. Nobody wants to walk into a marketing meeting and say, well, demand is low. Nobody's going to say, yay, demand is low. No, we want people willing and able to buy our stuff. We don't want them not willing and able to buy our stuff, okay? So that's popularity. Let's go on to the next determinant. All right, let's move on to the prices of related products. And we have two kinds of related products that we're going to talk about. We have complements and substitutes. Now, sometimes this subject can get very confusing for students. And so you should try and, you might have to watch this a couple times, or just be real careful. You could look up other videos on this idea of complements and substitutes. But I want to define them first, and then after I define them, I'll tell you how they affect demand. A complement good or a complement product is complements are products usually purchased and used with each other. Okay? Great example. My favorite example, peanut butter and jelly. Peanut butter and jelly. They are complement products. When you buy one of them, you usually buy the other. Bread and jelly. You go to the store, actually, bread, jelly, and peanut butter. All three of them are complements to one another. So when you go to the store, in fact, at the Publix near my house, when I go shopping, the peanut butter, the jelly, and the bread are all in the same aisle. Because they know that people are going to buy all three of those. And so that's what complement products are. How about a cell phone and a cell phone case? Cell phone and cell phone service. Cell phone case, and cell phone service. If you go into an AT&T store, you will see all three of those things available to you. You'll see the phones on display here. There'll be a wall over here with a whole bunch of accessories with cell phone cases, and you're going to have somebody who's going to come help you get cell phone service, because all three of those things are complements with one another. On the other hand, substitutes are products that all meet the same need. Okay, so somebody, for example, Coke and Pepsi are substitutes for one another. Now, before you get freaked out, before you go all marketing on me, remember this is an economics class. We don't really care about the fact that you think one of them is better than the other one. What we're saying is this, is for a person who wants to enjoy a drink, they could buy a Coke or a Pepsi and meet that same need. Now, each person is going to enjoy it differently because of their differences in utility and how they determine utility, but the fact remains that Coke and Pepsi are substitutes for one another. Water is a substitute for Coke. Coke is a substitute for water. I talked about peanut butter and jelly up here, right? Some people like peanut butter and banana instead of peanut butter and jelly. And so they'll slice up a banana and put it on the peanut butter with the bread and eat a peanut butter and banana sandwich. So, in a way, bananas and jelly are substitutes for one another when it comes to making peanut butter sandwiches. All right, so that's what a substitute is. With complements, you're buying them both at the same time. With substitutes, you're not buying both of them. You're buying either one or the other. And so complements are basically and products. Substitutes are or products. I'm buying this or that. Complements are I'm buying this and that. All right, now that you understand what a complement and what a substitute is, let's talk about how their prices affect demand. So let's say that the product we're talking about here is, let's say that this is the market for peanut butter. Market for peanut butter, for PB, right? All right, so a complement would be jelly. And let's say that in the jelly market, a completely different price and quantity market, right? So there's the jelly market here. And in the jelly market, the price increases. The price of jelly increases. So it goes from here up to here. So now, what's going to happen to quantity demanded in the jelly market, right? Before, people wanted this much. Now people want this much. So the quantity demanded is going to decrease. People are going to buy less jelly. Now that they're buying less jelly, they're also going to buy less peanut butter because they don't have as much jelly to put on bread, so they're going to buy less peanut butter. So if you have an increase in the price of a complement good, then in your market, demand is going to decrease. And then we can also see the exact opposite. So we're going to put here price complement or price comp. Now, if you have a decrease in the price of a complement good, decrease in the price. So if the price of jelly goes down from up here down to here, you're going to have an increase in quantity demanded because there's a negative relationship between price and quantity. And so people are going to demand and purchase more jelly. When they buy more jelly, they're also going to want to buy more peanut butter. So you're going to have an increase in demand. So a decrease or an increase in the price of a complement good is going to cause a leftward shift in the demand curve. But a decrease in the price of a complement good is going to cause a rightward shift of the demand curve because you're going to have an increase in demand. Okay? Now let's talk about substitutes. So we're talking about the market for peanut butter. Maybe a substitute for peanut butter is bologna. Okay, so people, they're going to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or they're going to have a bologna sandwich. So let's say, so that's B-O-L-O-G-N-A. Okay, so I remember that from the Oscar Mayer commercial years ago. B-O-L-O-G-N-A. So the bologna is a substitute for peanut butter. So what happens when the price goes up? If we have a price increase on a substitute, let's just say sub, an increase in the price of a substitute product, well, are people going to buy more bologna or less bologna when the price goes up? They're going to buy less bologna, right? They're like, oh man, the price of bologna went up. I can't buy as much of it, so I'm not going to buy as much bologna. So the quantity demanded of bologna is going to go down. Now, when people buy less bologna, then they're more likely to buy more peanut butter. They're going to say, I can't have bologna sandwiches. I'm going to have peanut butter and jelly. And so an increase in the price of a substitute results in an increase in the demand for our product. Now, this is not the demand for bologna. This is the demand for peanut butter. Price of bologna goes up. Demand for peanut butter goes up. And similarly, so that's going to cause the demand curve to shift to the right. On the other hand, if we have a decrease in the price of bologna, people are going to say, whoa, bologna's on sale. The price of bologna went down. Let's go buy a whole bunch of bologna. And when they buy a whole bunch of bologna, they're going to say, well, I'm not going to buy any peanut butter because I just spent all my money on bologna. And so the price of, so then the demand for peanut butter is going to go down People are going to buy less peanut butter. And that's going to result in a leftward shift of the demand curve because people are buying, they are less willing. This is really affecting, it's kind of affecting the willingness and ability. They're less able to buy peanut butter because they spent all their money on bologna. They're less willing to buy peanut butter because they're more willing to buy bologna. And so this price of related products is affecting both the ability and the willingness to buy the product that we're dealing with. Okay? And that's it for complements and substitutes. All right, let's just briefly talk about number of buyers in the market. Now, number of buyers in the market isn't actually going to affect the existing buyer's ability or willingness. All it's doing is either putting more people in the market who are willing and able, or taking people out of the market who are willing and able. So here's mainly what I mean by number of buyers in the market. Internet purchases, let's say Amazon.com. There was a time when not as many people had computers or internet access. And so there weren't as many people who had access to Amazon.com to make purchases. So the number of buyers in the market were fewer, and therefore demand was low. But when more people got computers and got internet access, more people were able to go to Amazon.com and make purchases. That was an increase in the number of buyers in the market, increase in number of buyers. Because there are now more buyers available in the market, that is naturally going to cause more people to be buying in that market. So that resulted in an increase in demand for buying from Amazon.com. Similarly, let's get rid of this market for peanut butter, although it would affect peanut butter as well. Let's say in your town, let's say you come from a place that where only about 50,000 people live, okay? And let's say that there is let's say there's a store there that sells boots. And the only people who sort of shop in that store are the people who live in the area, the 50,000 people, and maybe people who visit from surrounding areas, okay? But then something happens in your area. All of a sudden they start building lots of houses and lots of people start moving in. And so now instead of having 50,000 people living in your town, now you have 150,000 people living in your town, let's say 7 or 8 years later. Well, as all those people start moving into your town, there are now more people available to go shopping at the boot store. And that's an increase in the number of buyers. And so then that would result in an increase in demand for the boots at that boot store, because the number of buyers increased. On the other hand, let's say that a whole bunch of people leave a market. They decide, I don't want that anymore, okay? Let's say that a bunch of people say, you know what? I don't like candy anymore. I've decided candy is bad for you. And let's say that it's like a big wave. You know, lots of people are having diabetes, so everybody's freaking out. So they're like, I don't want to buy as much candy as I used to. All those people are leaving the candy market. And so if the number of buyers in a market decreases, then that's going to lead to a decrease in demand, obviously, because there are fewer people. Here's the key. Okay, here there are more people who are willing and able to buy. And when there are fewer buyers in the market, there are fewer who are willing and able. And so the fact that there are fewer willing and able people who are willing and able to buy, that naturally is going to result in a decrease in demand and a leftward shift of the demand curve. All right, so now lastly, let's talk about the expectations of the future price of this product that we're selling. So if this is the market for Honda motorcycles, or for a particular model of Honda motorcycles, or in general, let's say that this is just the price or the market for motorcycles in general. It could be all of the motorcycles. What we're asking here is what is going to happen to the price of this product in the future? Is this product do we think that the price of this product is going to go up in the future, or do we think the price of this product is going to go down in the future? This is also very important to understand if you're going to be somebody who deals in the stock market. Same exact kind of idea. What's going to happen to the price of this stock in the future, or what's going to happen to the price of this stock? Is it going to go up in the future, or is it going to go down in the future? So here's the idea. I want you to think about this. Let's say that you are about to buy a computer, okay? And you know, you know that the computer that you want to buy, you have an idea, or you have heard that the price of that computer is going to go up in 3 weeks. Are you going to want to wait the 3 weeks to buy it, or are you going to buy it right now? Okay, if the price is going up soon, so right now I will buy. Are you going to buy it now? Are you going to buy more of it, or are you going to buy less of it? Not buying it now means zero, that's less. Buying one of it means buying more, and so that means an increase. Well, if the price is going to go up in the future, you want to buy it right now. You're like, man, I got to go buy a whole bunch of that stuff. Maybe not the computer, but you might say, hey, the price of my favorite drink is going up. So I'm going to go buy like 3 cases of it, all right? Because the price is going up soon, so right now I'm going to buy more. And therefore, when the future price is expected to increase, future price of the product is expected to increase, that's going to result in an increase in demand right now. So the increase in demand right now. Because we don't want to know what's happening to the demand curve in 3 weeks. We want to know what's happening to the demand curve today. So an increase, a threat of an increase in the future price is going to increase the demand of that stuff. In fact, if everybody knows the price is going up, you may not get it all. You may run to the store and find yourself among another 50 people trying to buy the exact same thing because they all know the price is going up. On the other hand, if you know that the price is going down soon, you might say to yourself, you know what? I'm not buying any. I'm less willing to buy. Right now, I'm less willing to buy because I know that the price is going down soon. And that's when I'm going to buy it. So right now, I will buy less because I'm going to wait until later. I'm going to wait for the price to go down. Then I'm going to buy some. So if you expect the future price to decrease, future price is decreasing, then demand right now, today, demand is going to decrease. So if people find out that the price is going down, that's why a lot of people, they're going to want to keep it a secret if they know the price is going down. Target's like, oh, that object is going on sale next week. Everybody will say, oh, well, I'm not buying it right now, then I'll come back when it's on sale. Ooh, wait, you got to wait. Don't tell everybody it's going on sale. When it goes on sale, then the price is lower. Now we go back, we're going to the market, we're saying the price is going down, so quantity demanded is going to change. So price right now only affects quantity demanded, but future price affects the curve itself. So if they expect the price to go down in the future, that's going to shift the demand curve to the left because for right now, they're going to have a decrease in the demand curve. Okay, so those are all the determinants of demand. So expectations of future price, that's basically affecting the willingness to buy. I am not willing to buy right now because I'm saving up my willingness and ability to buy for the future. On the other hand, if the price is going to go up soon, I'm more willing to buy it now because I want to get it before the price goes up. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to turn to the determinants of supply. All right, so just to remind you, a supply curve is upward sloping because the law of supply says that there's a positive relationship between price and quantity. So we have an upward sloping curve here for supply. And so now we're going to look at each one of these variables that is not price or quantity. Now you might say, well, I see price right there. That's not, or you said it was a third variable, not price. Yeah, but here's what you have to understand is this one is prices of factors of production in other markets, not this product market. I want to remind you that businesses purchase factors of production from other businesses. And so the factors of production that they purchase affect their ability to sell products, certain quantities, at certain prices. And so that's why we have prices of factors of production up here. Okay? So let's go ahead and go through these determinants of supply and see how they affect the supply curve, see how they affect supply and ultimately the supply curve. So, production costs is probably the most important one because all of these others, for the most part, filter their way through production costs. And so, if we look at how costs affect supply, we can automatically then understand how all of these other things affect supply. So let's say we have two situations. We can either have an increase in production costs, or we can have a decrease in production costs. Now, what is a production cost? Well, it's pretty much all of the costs, all of the, let's say in particular, mostly it's the explicit costs that affect a business. But all of the costs that affect a business are ultimately production costs. So the idea here is when the cost of production goes up, here's what that means. Let's say that you're a business. Let's say that you have, I don't know, $10,000 to make a bunch of stuff. If it costs you more to make something that you used to make, let's say you used to make them for $1 a piece. So you could make 10,000 of them because you have $10,000. But now they cost $2 a piece to produce. How many can you produce? You can produce 5,000 because $2 times 5,000 is the $10,000 you have. So the idea here is as the cost of production goes up, you can't produce as much stuff. The amount that you can produce goes down. And the amount that you can produce effectively is your supply of whatever it is that you're making. And so an increase in production costs means that you can't make as much stuff. So you are going to have a decrease in supply. On the other hand, if your production costs go down, if the cost of producing a unit goes down to 50 cents a piece, now you can produce 20,000 of them because you have $10,000. And therefore, a decrease in production costs will result in an increase in supply. So when production costs go up, the result is a decrease in supply and a leftward shift of the supply curve. Okay? So an increase when it costs more to do business, when costs go up, you can't do as much business. On the other hand, if production costs go down, this is a very good situation. If production costs go down, then supply goes up because you can produce more, because you can do more with the money you have. And an increase in supply is going to be a rightward shift of the supply curve. And so a decrease in production costs results in a rightward shift of the supply curve. Okay? All right. Now let's move on to understanding this. Now we can actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this on the side, this production costs, because here's what we're going to do is we're going to filter all of these things through production costs. So over here, I'm going to say that an increase in production costs leads to a decrease in supply, but a decrease in production costs leads to an increase in supply. All right? So now let's talk about prices of factors of production. So prices of factors. Now, we've got land, labor, and capital. Now, I want to do these kind of separately because land and capital, I've mentioned this before, they behave more like products, where labor behaves a little bit differently. Now, it's going to work the same. the prices of factors of production. It's going to work the same. It's going to have the same effect on supply. But here's the reason I'm splitting them out, is because I want to make sure that you learn the word wages. And wages is very specifically goes with labor. Okay? And so here's what we're going to say. Let's do land and capital first, and then we'll go to wages. That when the price of any factor of production, what's an example of a factor of production? Well, I used to work for a company that would refill toner cartridges for printers. And one of the most important parts on a toner cartridge is called the drum. And we would get these boxes and boxes of drums so that when we remanufacture the cartridges, we might have to take out the old drum and put in a new drum. So we would buy these drums from a supplier that sold lots of supplies for printing. And one of them was drums. And so we'd get like 17 boxes of drums in and have them all sitting on the shelf. Well, if the price of those drums, that's capital. Those drums, that's a supply, but it's manufactured. It's capital. If the price of drums goes up, what does that mean for our production costs? Well, it means our production costs are going to go up. So if we have an increase in factor prices, and it doesn't have to be, a factor price could be land, could be our natural resources. Let's say that we are supplied with iron ore, and if the price of iron ore goes up, well, how's that going to affect our production costs? Well, that's going to result in an increase in production costs. And an increase in production costs means a decrease in supply. Do you see that? So, when factor prices go up, because that causes an increase in production costs, it's going to cause a decrease in supply. So an increase in factor prices is going to cause a leftward shift of the supply curve. And we are going to be supplying less. Why? Because it costs more. We have to pay out more money for our factors of production. On the other hand, if we have a decrease in factor prices, that means that we can buy more factors of production. Being able to buy more factors of production means that our production costs have gone down. That's a decrease in production costs, and therefore will result in an increase in supply. And so, a decrease, when it's cheaper to buy our supplies, when our supplies are cheaper, we can make more stuff. And so we have an increase in supply. That's a rightward shift of the supply curve, and that is good for us because now we can make more stuff and sell more stuff. Okay? All right, let's move on to wages now. Wages basically work the same. In fact, all I have to do is I can just erase factor prices here because wages are a factor price. They are the factor price of labor resources. So, but I want to talk about wages just for a second. A lot of times students will become confused with the word wages, and they'll confuse the word wages with the word income. Now, income, you've already seen, affects demand. Wages affect supply. Now, wages and income should be equal. And the reason that they're equal is because how much the wages that an employee earns is the income that they take home. But here's the big difference. In economics, in my class, wages is what suppliers call what they pay their employees wages. Consumers or buyers, they call what they take home income. So when I say income in this class, I'm talking about consumer demand. And when I'm talking about wages, I'm talking about businesses supplying. Okay? So that's a big deal. So because we're talking about supply here and not demand, we're going to use the word wages because that's how businesses think about the money that they pay out. Businesses pay out wages. Consumers and workers receive income. All right? It's important that you understand that. In fact, another way to think about it is this. If you look at the households, the circular flow diagram, and firms, right? Income, firms pay households through the labor market, right? So through the labor market, households provide labor, firms provide households with income, right? So over here, this dollar sign, that's income. But when firms pay it out over here, they call it wages. When it's a cost to them, it's called wages. When it's earned money for households, it's called income. So please remember that. And that's the main reason that I split out land and capital from labor. Also, the labor market often behaves a little differently than the land and the capital markets. Okay? All right, so here's the deal. When wages go up, when an employer has to pay more money out to their employees, that increases their production costs. They have to pay out more money for the same work. They're not getting extra work out of this. If it's just a matter of the workers working more, that's already handled on the supply curve. But this is a situation where workers are actually getting paid more. They've all gotten a raise, and now the company has to pay out higher wages than they used to. Because they're paying more out, that's an increase in production cost. An increase in production cost means a decrease in the supply curve and a leftward shift of the supply curve. On the other hand, if wages go down, if employers can pay less money out to the employees, that means that they're paying less money in costs. And a decrease in production costs is going to lead to an increase in supply. That's a rightward shift of the supply curve. Now what we're talking about, this idea of wages in the labor market, this would then be the labor market. This is the supply in the labor market in particular. This is extremely important in both microeconomics and also in macroeconomics. So be very careful to understand this idea of how wages affect supply. And then in the next lesson, we're going to learn about how it would affect quantity demanded. Okay? All right, let's go on to the next item. All right, let's talk about overhead costs. What are overhead costs? Well, in a business, overhead is all of the costs that don't directly go into the production of the thing that you're making. So for example, the rental facility, let's say that you rent a building to do business. That's generally considered an overhead cost. Let's say advertising for trying to sell your product. That's often considered an overhead cost. Your water bill, your electrical bill, overhead costs. Your phone bill, those are overhead costs. And sometimes your product, let's say it's really cheap to get your factors of production. You know, it's not expensive. In fact, let's say the prices of the factors have even gone down. So you can produce more than ever. But something happens in the economy that causes rent to go up or phone bills to go up. And so something that's not even related to what you produce, the costs of that thing go up and you have to be buying that thing. And therefore, that's an increase in overhead costs. And so an increase in overhead ultimately means an increase in your production costs. Because I just told you previously, right, that production costs are all of the costs associated with doing business, all of the costs associated with producing something. And in order to produce something, you're going to have water running into your building, for example, for the bathrooms so that your employees can use the restroom when they need to, or electricity so that when you pull the trigger on a drill, it starts up. Or the electricity for the computers, or advertising. You're not going to sell anything unless you advertise somehow. So an increase in overhead costs means an increase in production costs, which means a decrease in supply and a leftward shift of the supply curve. On the other hand, let's say that let's say you have a really well insulated building that doesn't really need to be heated much. It doesn't really need to be heated much. And so in the winter time, you don't have to run the air conditioning, right? And let's say that it has good heating to start with, so you're not going to pay as much electricity in the winter time. And the result of that is your overhead costs are going to go down. And that results in a decrease in production costs. And a decrease in production costs means an increase in supply. So now you can put that money towards making more stuff. And an increase in supply means a rightward shift of the supply curve. Isn't that awesome? That is good stuff. We like it when the supply curve shifts to the right. We don't like it when the supply curve shifts to the left. That's not as good. Okay, but it happens. Sometimes it's good for the economy, but it's not good for our business. All right, so that's overhead costs. What about supply shocks? What is a supply shock? Well, a supply shock is an interesting thing. When we say supply shock, think tsunami, think hurricane, think, it doesn't always have to be a natural disaster. It can be a lot of things. A stock market crash could be a supply shock, okay? A supply shock is basically a situation, supply shock. A supply shock is some sort of drastic event in the economy. It's a drastic event. In fact, let's write this out. A drastic event. In fact, it can be something good. It doesn't have to be something bad. A drastic event in the economy that greatly affects the supply of resources, or let's say resources / products. All right. So in Florida, there are a lot of hurricanes, and one of the things that happens in Florida during the hurricanes is everybody runs to Home Depot and Lowe's to buy up plywood. Why do they buy all the plywood? Because they want to put plywood over their windows and to protect their windows from flying objects, right? What I don't understand is, I don't know what because this happens over and over and over again. When the hurricane was over, did they throw out the plywood? Why didn't they just keep the plywood so that the next time there's a hurricane? Because every single time there's a hurricane, they run out of plywood. So I assume people are just throwing the plywood out. They're not keeping it. I don't know why. Maybe I know a little bit about plywood. You can probably keep it in your shed if you're getting the right kind of plywood. So here's the thing. Something happens and it puts the economy in a situation where it's harder to get a hold of plywood because all the plywood has been bought out. Now, how do you think the contractors feel about the fact that they can't go get plywood a week after the hurricane is over to do their regular job that they would use plywood for? Okay, that is a supply shock. And we can have two kinds of supply shocks. We can have negative supply shocks and positive supply shocks. Let's call them SS. So if we have a negative supply shock, that results in an increase. It typically results in an increase in production costs. A negative supply shock makes it more expensive to do business because let's say you really need to get some plywood. Well, you'll pay extra money to get the plywood. And ultimately what that's really doing is it's causing an increase in the price of a factor of production. So a lot of times these supply shocks work through some of these other things. Something else, let's say that that hurricane knocked out the electricity and keeping things cold in your business is important. Well, now you're going to have to get a generator and run the generator and pour gasoline or diesel into the generator so that you can keep your refrigerators going so all your product doesn't get destroyed or doesn't thaw out. Okay? So that would be a negative supply shock. A positive supply shock is something that happens that actually winds up being good for you. For example, the plywood companies probably do pretty well during a hurricane, right? Everybody wants their stuff, so they have an increase in supply. So a positive supply shock is going to result in, well, it won't always result, but let's just say that it results in a decrease in production costs. Oftentimes the reason it results in a decrease in production costs is because the positive supply shock makes these factors of production more favorable for your company. And that is going to result in an increase in supply and a rightward shift of the supply curve. Okay, so supply shocks are sort of this just like I said, drastic, out of the ordinary events that occur in the economy, and sometimes they are, positive supply shocks are often called beneficial supply shocks, and negative supply shocks are, detrimental, I guess is the right word, detrimental supply shocks. But it's one of the things that economists account for when dealing with supply and demand issues. Okay. All right. Let's move on to this last one. Taxes are a really easy one to explain. When I say taxes, I'm talking about business taxes. Businesses have to pay taxes on. Actually, they have to pay a lot of different kinds of taxes. Businesses have to pay employment taxes, meaning. Social Security, maybe you pay into Social Security at your job. Well, you only pay half of your Social Security. Your employer is required to pay the other half of your Social Security. There are other employment taxes too, like workers' compensation insurance. That's a requirement in a lot of places, in a lot of industries. So taxes, and then there's income taxes. When the business profits, the business has to pay out taxes, a proportion of their profits to the government. And so taxes are basically a cost. So an increase in any kind of taxes, or a net increase in taxes, basically makes it more expensive to do business. So that's an increase in production costs, which results in a decrease in supply. And then a decrease in taxes, a net, meaning if some of your taxes went up and some of your taxes went down, but overall your taxes went down. So a decrease in taxes results in a decrease in your production costs. And when your costs of production go down, you are loving life. That means that you will have an increase in supply. Why? Because you can make more stuff. Why? Because you have more money, because you're keeping more of your money. Okay? Well, that's pretty much it. That's everything having to do with the determinants of supply. It is important for you to understand these determinants of supply. It's also important for you to understand the determinants of demand. And what we're going to do is, in the next lesson, we're going to bring these determinants of supply and demand together and understand how a market for a product is a very dynamic thing as your supply curve and your demand curve are moving, left and right, right and left. Okay? All right, well, that's all I have to say about the determinants of supply and demand. Let me know if you have any questions.